regionally calculated. Like at the point where you need more money to live in London than you do in the rest of the UK, you need more money to live in San Francisco than probably most in Missouri. We think that this is something that would be calculated on a regional basis to allow for varying food prices, the local housing market, electricity bills, and stuff like that. We're just giving people enough money to live on, therefore minimum wages wouldn't be necessary anymore. In addition to that, we'd also be not including things like disability benefits or child benefit and all that sort of stuff. Like we would give those as well, because we recognise that the basic income would be for what people generally need in order to survive and live a good life. We think that if you're disabled, you have extra needs and concerns. If you're a single parent, for instance, and you need child benefits, you also have extra needs and concerns. We just provide that on top of a basic income. Right. Haven't got any POIs, so hopefully they understand the policy and this isn't going to be a difficult debate based on the policy. So let's get on to the arguments. First one then, rights to life. We think that's, for fairly straightforward reasons, the most important right you can ever possibly have, because it's the right that without which you can't enjoy any other rights, right? Because you're not alive. We think that that's something that is basically the last right left standing. Even in places that have the death penalty, like Missouri, for instance, it is like the last right left standing, right? At the point where you have been sentenced to death, that doesn't mean that the state can torture you. They still provide food. In many places, they still provide a last meal. And right up to the point where the lethal injection is given, or whatever the method is in a specific state, you still give them some basic sort of, some basic right. Yeah? But what we say is that right means nothing and is useless if it's not if it's not backed up with giving you enough money on which to live. Right? We think you should recognise that part of having the right to life and part of being alive means, because we live in a capitalist society, that you need enough money to pay for rent, you need enough money to put food on the table. Right? We say that that's something which needs to be provided. We think it would probably be great if it were done by charities or whatever, but but we say at the point where it can't be, and the point where it isn't, and the point where that's obviously not good enough, then the government is the only body to step in and sort of do this. Firstly, because it's got great political power, it can get millions of pounds out of nowhere. The US military budget has got millions and millions of dollars behind it. Reduce it maybe a little, and you might be able to get basic income for most states. And then secondly, governments are the single body possibly that have a mandate and a duty to do that through the fact they were democratically elected, right? The fact that they are supposed to represent the citizens of that country. We think they are the obvious best actor in order to do that. We think at the point where they are the only ones who can do that, and at the point where it's not working through any other means, they should be doing that. Second point then, about the benefits. We're moving on to the benefits now. So let's talk about helping poor people, right? So we recognise that, that there have been some trials, but and mostly limited through just getting the finances and just having the political will behind it. We'll take for an example of somewhere where it's been a long term, being the Cherokee Indians in North Carolina, right? Where they've got that's basically a privatised version of basic income. Yeah? At the point where you've got big sort of casino businesses in that area, and they've sort of used the proceeds from that business in order to give a basic income to the people, right? What you've seen from studies in there is that the people are less likely to commit substance abuse, more likely to have psychiatric problems, less likely to have behavioural problems or commit crimes. In addition to that, they're more likely to do things like graduate from high school on time, right? We think that that's the sort of thing which happens at a point where you're not stressed about where your next paycheck is coming from. At the point where you're not worried about how you're going to put food on the table, you've got more time to not be stressed and more time to do things which are useful. Yes.
What part of your plan actually incentivizes people to get their degrees and get on with their passions in society?
We think that's fairly natural anyway, right? We think that people will have incentives to better themselves anyway, even if it's just at the point where if you have more money, you have more disposable income, right? All a basic income does is provide you with the basic means of life. It provides you with enough money to pay for rent and buy food. At the point where you want to have enough money, to do whatever leisure activities you want to do, whether it's buying alcohol or reading books or going to the cinema, right? You will therefore have an incentive to look for and find work, right? This translates to an incentive to, for example, get a better education, simply because having a better education makes it more likely that you'll be able to find higher paid work, right? As C for reference, what I just said about Cherokee Indians, one of the benefits you got from there is them graduating from high school on time. That's not the sort of thing that happens if you assume that people just have no incentives to work or do anything else, right? We think that, they do because of what I've just said. Moving on lastly then, before I run out of time, about why it's good to provide even to financially secure people. So the most important thing here is we look at what means testing is and what means testing does. And what it means is that the line between where you don't get the money and where you do will always be arbitrary. This means two things. Firstly, it politicises the boundary, with the question being, what about the people who are just above the line? Like, aren't they leading a really cushy lifestyle? That's where you get mischaracterizations from newspapers like the Daily Mail and TV channels like Fox News. Right? The point where that runs a risk of sort of, when you have that politicisation and you have that political sort of push, that runs a risk of the line being downgraded to the point where it harms people who genuinely need the support that this policy provides, who would otherwise be going to food banks, who would otherwise possibly just be living on the streets and not be able to afford rent. Right? We think that if we want to compare the two possibilities, and we have to sort of think about which risk we would rather take, we would rather someone like Bill Gates have an extra $15,000 or however much it would precisely be to sort of spend on something else. We would rather that than someone be left in the cold because they can't pay full rent, or starve because they don't have food. This is just a very good idea. We don't want people to die. Propose.
We thank the Prime Minister, and we now recognize the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Ethan Arbuckle, to open the case for the Opposition.
First off, I would like to begin with thank yous to everyone here. Thank you for Cardiff to inviting us to come. We very much like to enjoy it. With that, I'll get off into a bit of rebuttal to the Prime Minister's speech. First off, we're going off to the example he provided, which is very interesting, of the Cherokee Nations. We see that particularly all Indian nations in the United States have some of the lowest education rates in the United States. We also see that the majority of them are impoverished and have not gotten out and made any money. So we actually see that the very example of why this isn't going to work is provided within the American Indian nations. They are going to be the most impoverished and have the least education from any particular people group in the United States because they have no incentive to work, which I'll get onto later. We're also going to get off into a bit of a rebuttal point, the fact that a little bit about Kant's points on why and how we should decide things. Kant says in order for us to determine anything in the world, we must first determine if it is possible and if it is practical. So going on with this line of argumentation, we see that in order for us to decide if we can actually get the benefits of these right to life, we have to see if it is possible. But even if we look at the very basic on the feasibility of this, we see that, number one, no country has ever successfully implemented this long term. No feasibility there. And secondly, the amount of money it would cost is staggering. They seem to suggest, not right now, sir, that this is simply and easily done. We see even at the basic level of poverty, it would cost the United States $3.8 trillion a year to do the very basic income. So we see that what this means, going off to my first substantive point, is the fact that this point will cause everything else to not be able to happen. Basically, what they're asking you to give up is this right to life, which I'll get onto later, would force the abdication of every single other right we have in organized society. You see that particularly this destroys the ability for a nation to have its national security, freedom of the press, religion, etc. There is no ability to create infrastructure and no ability to negotiate with other states, enforce law, or provide justice. All of these things which are necessary for everyone to have life. Without these things, nothing can happen properly. I'll take Mr. Dominic's question.
Yeah, so you specifically say this hasn't been implemented long term, but we see specifically that Alaska has implemented at least $1,200 a month since 1982. How would you respond that program has been successful ever since then?
This is not a universal basic income because it doesn't provide enough for people to actually live. In comparison to the plan presented by the Prime Minister today, which provides for people actually to live off of, this is a substantial, just a little bit of money to help people, and that's not what they're advocating for, particularly in today's round. Now let's go off into a little bit more point here. Firstly, to indirect rebuttal here is that it destroys the incentive to work. Quite frankly, if, like I said, well, they're going to have incentives if they want to go to the cinema and do all sorts of other things. But we don't see that happening, particularly going to his example of the American Indian nations. All they did was sit on their hands, continue their tribal ways, not making any money, and paying for things they wanted, like alcohol, and getting themselves drunk and many things like this, and there was not benefit for society. We see the American government had to step in and incentivize through other means, forcing them to get education, which is why our currently status quo welfare programs, which require that you help yourself, are the best means to actually solve this problem. We also see that the government hasn't addressed any of these Western liberal nations, the current welfare programs, and how they actually are incentivizing people to go out and help themselves, which is not happening under their plan. There's nothing particularly about the Prime Minister's plan which is going to get us anything towards incentivization. Now let's really go off into an analogy here, and secondly, on the practicality point, my second substantive point, the inherent problems we have with this particular plan. The first inherent problem with universal basic income is if you have to give money to those who don't need it. Now they say that it's fine and dandy, we'll give money to people like Bill Gates. But they fail to see that this means they're giving money to people who don't need it. Which means basically Bill Gates doesn't need this money. He may as well use it as toilet paper or something like this. And this is wasting the taxpayers' money, which will have been increased. So when we say this is a massive waste and misuse of money, this is not something we should do. Not right now, ma'am. Now we see the second point here is it's not fixing the root cause of a problem. Let me play it out too simply. They're saying that there is a problem or that this is cancer, but instead of looking for the fix to cancer, they're giving everyone in the world painkillers, whether they have cancer or not. They're making you feel better, but when it doesn't solve the root problems in the world, they're simply making you feel better. That's it. It's a pipe dream. Nothing will be solved, nothing's going to happen, and what we need to do is go ahead and solve the root problems of poverty. I'll take the question now, sir.
If we've got to take a comparative between Bill Gates having some more toilet paper and people starving on the streets, we know which we'd rather have. Which would you?
I see. That's quite easy. We should use our welfare programs which incentivize working and helping people to help themselves. We also see another wise man once said, you give a man a fish, he'll eat for one day. You teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. So instead of spilling trillions of dollars and destroying every other right we have, how about we incentivize people to go out and work for themselves? That way they no longer need the government, instead of teaching people to stick out their hands and say, give me more. Now let's go off and continue on this more. We see that in the status quo, that this is already happening, that jobs need to be filled, and that this is something that is not actually going to help in the long term of this. We see that we see quite particularly that they're not going to be able to respond to the fact that the root cause is not being filled. So they talk about the right to life, they talk about all these things that need to happen. But when we're not solving the root causes, we're simply giving people painkillers, nothing is going to change. We're going to continue to stay in the same state we already are. And while, yes, it sounds amazing for us to be able to go out and help people, and yes, I want to help people, this is not the means in which we actually need to help people. So instead of this, the opposition proposes that we help people in such a way that incentivizes them to actually work and work for themselves. Firstly, that we're not going to do it in a way that gives it to everyone, because people who don't need it shouldn't have to pay more taxes for it, which is going to be needed in this particular plan. We're going to revamp the entirety of the tax system and the tax codes, meaning everyone's going to have to pay more and not be able to do things for themselves. So instead of doing this and hurting everyone in this particular instance, we say, let the people help themselves. If you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he will eat for a lifetime. So while we need to focus on people's rights, let's focus on all of their rights. So when we see that with the U.S. government, we're using essentially the entirety of the United States government's budget every single year to fix a particular problem, we see that we're no longer going to be able to have any other operation of the government. What they're effectively doing is they're saying this right is more important, but what they're really doing is destroying every single other right and every single action of government. So let's continue on with something that will actually work. Let's solve for all the problems and actually fix the root cause of this cancer, rather than continuing giving everyone in the world painkillers. With that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank the Leader of the Opposition. We now turn to the Deputy Prime Minister, Megan Morello.
Ready? All right. I would also like to do some thank yous because I'm American as well. I would like to thank our lovely friends from Missouri for coming out. I know it's been a long trip, and I'm glad that you're with us here today. So jumping in with a little bit of rebuttal to our opening opposition. So first of all, I would like to kind of put out there that this House supports debate. Now, we're not necessarily required to provide some kind of direct policy on how we're going to do this. We're not going to talk to you about here's where this money is going to come from, here's how we're going to do this, and specific policy. We're just telling you why we support it and why it's a good thing fundamentally within society. So, kind of jumping in, we would, just to kind of reiterate, is that we feel like it's fundamentally better to have benefits in some areas. So even if it is hard, to fund this in, the entire country, we feel like it is better to have benefits in some areas than benefits in no areas. On our side of the house, it's just generally more beneficial to have people who have who are taken care of financially and have these benefits which we're proposing, rather than them to continue off the status quo with this welfare state where they are fundamentally struggling in general. So more benefits rather than no benefits. Let's see. And we also want to point out that people are still working on our side of the house. As my partner mentioned, there is an incentive, to work because you want to. So let's just imagine it, right? So you have people who don't need this money, and now they have or say they're just above this poverty line, right? And they're like, oh well, we didn't really need this, but it's great. It's like a little boost, and they start spending their money, getting to show off a little bit of wealth. People who just have this baseline, who have had nothing and now have something, are going to want to work so that they can continue to spend money within the economy and continue to do this type of thing. No, thank you. So yes, we would like to point that out. Let's see. So I think I'm going to wrap up my rebuttal there and kind of go more in my substantive. So what I want to point out is that, particularly within regards to the welfare state and why that's not working currently as the status quo. So people, obviously, as I've stated, are falling victim to poverty even during the welfare state. But I would also like to point out a growing problem, which I feel like our side of the house addresses, and that is robots. Okay, so automation within workspaces is really automation within workspaces has been growing and growing and growing, and so there are less jobs to go around, considering the fact that people are now getting replaced by people who are what I'm going to call the perfect worker, right? So no rest breaks, no dissatisfaction, no holidays. There's a drastic reduction of errors in this type of stuff. It's perfect. And with the invention of AI, we are having more people who are learning. So even as stuff develops, these people will be able to continue and continue and continue. And we will be making products at a breakneck speed. It'll be fantastic. So people who are within this welfare state, telling them to just, work harder, or let's just get you on welfare and, we'll kind of support you so that you can help yourself, they're not going to have anywhere to go. So what do we do with that? So just kind of to bolster that a little bit. So machines have greater sensors than humans in this situation. They can see, touch, hear in multiple directions, simultaneously. It's fantastic. They're for certain more dangerous things, like you break a machine, you fix it, they keep going, as opposed to having to pay for their Medicare or things like that. No, thank you. Let's see. So yes. So trends towards machines taking over and replacing humans is everywhere within life, and we need to be able to account for that, which is why having people have a fundamental, basic living wage to live on and then continue to work up is important. I'll take your POI now if you're still offering.
Yeah. So you talk about automation. Isn't it the government's job to protect workers' rights to have that job, rather than just letting capitalism take its place and include this AI technology that basically removes jobs from human beings?
Thank you for your question. I would say that AI is not a bad thing on our side of the house. I'd like to hear in your speech how you kind of say that more progress is a bad thing in regards to society. But I'd say that I'd say it isn't the government's job to stunt that kind of progress, because there are people working on increasing AI technology, and why would we take them out of their roles in order to, help that type of stuff when we could just provide them with this money and, continue to. The capitalist system isn't bad on our side of the house. We don't see a problem with that. Another point with that is, within the welfare state, you have less time if you're just continually trying to help yourself and help, going through that process and that rigmarole, which already isn't working, to help yourselves fundamentally, which is what you're talking about with this baseline thing, where it's we want to help people fundamentally before, we can continue on and just give them, before they can get money. And it's if you're spending all your time working to try and climb this ladder, as opposed to just being fundamentally okay and then improving your work, your work capabilities as a result of having more time to think about what you're doing and that kind of incentivization, then yeah. So and for that I'm happy to propose.
We now recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Ms. Madison Marquardt.
Okay, I'm going to begin with a round of thank yous. Thank you to the University of Central Missouri for providing this opportunity, as well as the students of Cardiff. We have seen lots of talent here, and I really appreciate it. So first I'm going to jump into a summary. Opening government tells us that we have this moral obligation about the right to life, that we should be giving Bill Gates toilet paper rather than using this money to fix the institutions that are causing the costs that are creating the problems with affordability as far as rent, healthcare, and other things. And so they're letting Bill Gates and people like that receive the same amount. This is causing inequality in society, and we will bring that up within rebuttal as well as the substantive point. Now let's move on to the rebuttal. So they bring up a point about how this is just not a direct policy and that they're just telling us why we support it, which is important, but we're telling you we don't support it because you're throwing money at the wrong place. You're not fixing the institutions that are causing the costs for like these people that are causing them to be in poverty. You are letting that go and allowing the government to just throw money at the issue, which is going to ultimately cause them to go bankrupt because the issue currently in practical matters is at such a high level that the government doesn't have the ability to actually fix this. And so if there's no practicality behind their moral issues, then we need to look at where we can fix this and have the moral obligation in other places. And so when we look to rebuttal, we see that first, they can't actually guarantee this money. Universal income goes to children. It goes to everyone, right? These children might not see this money. How can they guarantee that parents are not going to take the money away from them? How can they guarantee where the money goes to? How can they guarantee that the dependents actually receive this money? Additionally, we see that government phases out welfare and universal health care and other items that are meant to reduce costs within healthcare and things like that when you are giving them a basic income, because the government says, well, we're giving you enough money, you should be able to fund this. They let everything else go like to the crapper, right? And so they phase these things out. I'll take your point at the beginning of my substantive. Additionally, talking about the means test, this is a problem with governments. The practicality of this, when we let this money go to waste, we're not actually fixing these institutions. And that is a reason why you're not going to prefer the gov. On to the automation point. The point against the automation point is that government should be protecting the rights of people. They should be protecting the interests of people. Currently, we are seeing that we choose to opt into a society where we have the freedom to have dependents. We like to take care of our kids. We like to take care of our dependents, right? And so we operate in this society. However, they are going to flip that completely on the upside. And so when we protect the interests of people, we will be protecting their rights to stay within their career path. If automation's taking over your career path, that removes your passion, that removes your incentive to exist as a human being. And so when a robot at that point is called innovation, where you don't get to do what you love to do, that is problematic. And so the government should be taking care of your interests, your freedom to access that. I can take your question now.
We don't think that people have the right to a job so much as they have the right to the money that comes from that job, right? If they've got a passion for a thing, they can do it as a hobby as well as a job, right?
Not necessarily, because if that job is completely taken over by a robot, then they cannot do that job. And so, doing it as a hobby is not as important as the ability to work at a long day at something you're passionate to do, advocating for others as a lawyer, coming home. That is important. That is part of our passion. That is part of our incentive to live.
Yeah,
Yes.
and underneath the welfare point, what would you say to the people who need the assistance of welfare but maybe $2 to $3 over the welfare line and just can't get it or can't get access to that?
I would say the government should be taking the money that you're proposing for the universal income towards welfare. I think we need to expand that. I think we need to reduce the costs that are causing people to go hungry. I think we need to reduce all of those issues by putting it into the government institutions that we have that are failing because we don't have enough funding. Yep.
So just before this speech that you just provided, you admitted that people love going to work. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, I do believe individuals, if they go into the right career path, they have that freedom and they would enjoy their job. They would enjoy the fact that they have pride in what they've built. They would enjoy the fact that they have that freedom to have that job. Going on to the substantive point. We need to address the equality versus equity problems that are with this proposal. Individuals who have certain medical costs, they have more student loans, they raise the universal income higher, and so other individuals who don't have these medical costs, don't have these student loans, can throw that money wherever they like, right? So it still allows people to be more uppity because they're going on more vacations. It still allows people to have better opportunities because they don't have to pay for these medical costs, because they don't have to pay for these other things. And so this still allows inequality to exist. We need to be looking at equity, which welfare programs provide. They look at your taxes, they look at your income, they look at your situation, and they tailor the needs of that to providing what people need. And so today, what we've talked about is how the government bench is not actually fixing the problem. They're throwing money at the problem. This is not a tailored, specific plan. And even though they argue that this gives you the right to life, we argue that we're substantially reducing the freedoms of this. Additionally, we see that they're not fixing the key problems, the root problems that are causing individuals to be in poverty, that are causing them to not be advocated on behalf as the government. We see that automation's taking over, and they call that innovation. That is problematic. Individuals should have the right to work if they want to. And so the ability for them to basically just throw out these freedoms is problematic, and that is why we're going to be voting for the opposition.
I think our top half of the debate, we now turn our attention to the Leader of the Second Government, Dom Mercer, to open the case for Second Government.
So I would also like to extend a huge blanket of thank yous, first to the Knoll Foundation, and first also to our Chancellor and anyone who helped get us and support us here, and secondly to the people of Cardiff who have been gracious hosts, and to the university itself. But with that, we have a lot of debate, so let's get right into it. So firstly, we would like to summarize and rebut. We'd like to say that we agree with our partners here on the bench that people have the right to life. That governments even further have the ability and duty to help the poor. But where we kind of differ and would like to go a little bit of a different direction is that we agree in giving benefits towards the individual top half of people in society. But I'd like to make a key acknowledgement here, guys. Even if Bill Gates is spending money on toilet paper, that's generating money towards the guy who owns the toilet paper company, which even further then generates money towards the government and towards the GDP. So we don't see how this is individually harmful just because now Bill Gates is spending a little bit of money extra on toilet paper. That's net beneficial, especially to the toilet paper company owner and especially to each citizen in the economy that toilet paper company benefits. Like, I know that sounds funny, but at the end of the day, it generates serious revenue. So getting on even further than that, we see then that the next group over here says that, well, we should stick with programs like welfare. Well, the problem here, and which I'll get into under my new substantive point, is that welfare creates a ceiling for individuals. Welfare creates a ceiling that nobody wants to pass because, and I'll get to your point in a second, sir. Welfare creates a ceiling that the individual no longer wants to breach, because at that moment we go from a theoretical situation of a welfare ceiling of $1,000. At 1,001, you now hit tax money, and you now go less than the original amount that you were given from welfare. So what does this create? Essentially what economists call a poverty trap, where individuals do not want to break that ceiling because now we're hurting individuals. So getting on even further than that, they say, well, we should just expand welfare. But the problem is all you're doing is expanding the trap and putting more people into that trap, and we say that is net harmful. And I'll now take the first of 2 points.
My question is, you say that it is helpful to allow Bill Gates to spend money on toilet paper, but how do you think it's helpful to raise everyone's taxes by 30%?
Because specifically, even though you're raising these taxes, the revenue generated from the raised taxes on the individuals such as Bill Gates, because we're expecting on different models to scale that income on higher individuals and scale it lower on different individuals, you'll see that that revenue generated goes to help every single person, regardless of what level you are. Even the top half will go down and benefit the bottom half. So the answer here is that it helps, quite simply. Getting on even further now, we see that we also go into the robot and automation point, and we also agree with our partners over here that robots and automation have been key in the automotive industry, the housing industry, and the baking industry. And last time I checked in America, those three industries were not doing great at all, guys. And we're actually a huge point, or a huge cause of the 2008 recession. So getting on even to my next point, we're actually going to start a lot of these substantive points. So my first substantive point is what I sort of alluded to, is the removal of a ceiling and the addition of a floor. The addition of a floor. So the very first thing is we're removing that ceiling. So now with getting rid of welfare, with getting rid of SNAP, and getting rid of all of this, we take away that ceiling. We now say you can, and another clear thing I need to make before I go on is we disagree with the fact of taking away the minimum wage. We want to keep that in our own model. I missed that in my speech. So with the removal of this ceiling, we create the addition of the floor. Now you're getting the incentive, the check also. But along with generating the revenue with your individual job, you now see that you can go past $1,001. You were incentivized to go to $1,200. However far you want, we're not going to punish it for you. So what does this mean for individual families? This means that now I don't have to watch and budget my money towards the government, so they don't have to keep an idea on me to see how far I go in order to keep my funds or tax it. What it means is I can now generate the maximum amount of money for my children, for my sickly elder, for my grandfather, for whatever need I need to, and not have to worry about, is this too much? But even further than that, we see that people who do not get help, specifically people who are right above that poverty line that welfare cannot help, now this new proposed system benefits them all. So someone like a college student who is just over the poverty line but has to spend money on textbooks, which welfare doesn't account for, who has to take time off of work because now they have to spend more collegiate hours, which welfare does not account for. Our model, or our proposed system of the UBI now accounts for that and now benefits these individuals greatly, because now we see these individuals have A, the incentive to do it, and B, the means to go on and get that money and use it towards their books, or use it towards whatever the heck you need to in order to further your situation, because I personally believe it's not the government's business how you spend your money. It's not the government's business that you should spend your money this way. Rather, here's your money, better yourself. Better yourself and make your position better, because guess what? That's going to make our country better. That's going to make our government better. And that's what the government is supposed to do. That is the government's duty. And with that, I'll take the second of 2 points.
Yeah, so you talk about the costs associated with colleges and such, and then you talk about Bill Gates potentially putting the money that they have into the economy. Wouldn't it be more helpful if we did a need-based, like the welfare system that we have currently, and put that money into the institutions to reduce the cost of schooling? Well,
I sort of think the answer is inherent towards my case and sort of how you said it, the needs-based system. The government is the ultimate actor who decides these needs-based system, and as I've shown you, this actor has not done a very well job at deciding A, who needs it, and B, how these individuals can use that need. This model, or this universal basic income, gets rid of all that and says, you know what? You're the best person to decide how you need it. You're the best person to decide how you spend it, and you're the best person to decide how this money helps you and benefits your children, your elder, however you go about it. And that's what we stand for today. And so our second substantive point here is that, as I've kind of been alluding to, it is better than all government programs we have available, such as the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition, which has a ton of issues. Firstly, people sell these all the time in America. I've seen multiple people who will take their SNAP or their benefits and sell them for hard cash, half of what they get. What does that mean? That means they're trying to turn their SNAP benefits into a universal basic income. So why not preempt all of that and actually give them a universal basic income that they can use however they want? Again, this mitigates a lot of the issues we have at hand, which goes even further on welfare and SNAP and all of this. But even further, 1 in 7 people are still under the current welfare system, under the current SNAP system, hungry in America. Now these people use this extra supplemental money to feed their families, to go on even further. And then they say, well, this is not going to create any incentive to work, but they're further ignoring there is multiple incentive to work, not just money, such as social status, such as friends, camaraderie. I can tell you multiple people I know that have found romance at work. There is a ton of different incentives to go in, socialize, and become a part of the workforce, not just funds itself. It is merely one factor of the formula. And for all these reasons, we say that a universal basic income benefits everyone across the board, from the top to the bottom, and each person that pays a part of it, actually generates actually generates revenue towards the system, which in turn helps everybody.
And that was Dom Mercer from the Louisiana State University Shreveport opening up the bottom half of the debate as closing government. Now we turn it over to closing opposition, John Martin, student from Cardiff University.
Honourable panel, friends and adversaries, I am a man of liberty. The torch burns bright on my badge and in my heart. However, what we have heard here is wrong. The fundamental policy that all governments should be pursuing is not to supply every single basic need of their citizens. The fundamental basic thing a government should be supplying is pushing the people from the working class to the middle class, because when they are in the middle class, they are by far and away more productive and are much more beneficial in terms of the tax income that they produce, and getting them out of that means that the government gets more taxation, but at the same time has to spend less on people who are poorer, because they've got them out of the tax bracket. Now, let me tell you why this system is worse. Fundamentally, if you do the reading, even if we don't use the first MEC and we use the second MEC, this is going to require a tax increase of 27% of national GDP in the United Kingdom. 27% of national GDP. That's the tax increase if we don't take into account all other health things. If we were to exclude all of the other social regimes that we needed, France has estimated they would have to amalgamate the entire of their already ridiculous welfare state system that they have, and health and education, just for this. 6.5% of GDP is actually the figure that they would be willing to spend on this if we were to go for a viable structure. However, the NHS in the UK only requires 1.5% of GDP. So this is fairly cool, casual, at least 3 times an NHS, just to give everybody £10,000, or in that case, actually £4,000. Now, let me explain to you why this makes it worse off for everyone. Now, what we want is an economy which is dominated by the middle class. If the middle class are dominating it, then you're getting an awful lot of views and opinions from the lower class and a couple from the upper class. However, when the economy is dominated by the middle class, everything is set up just right. Now, when a middle class person makes a purchase, a middle class person might purchase a nice Audi, or because I know someone on this panel, they might go to Royal Ascot for a wonderful run up and down the horse tracks. When a middle class person purchases something, it's a luxury good, invariably. This £10,000 that will be spent, or let's just pull that figure out of nowhere, that would be given to the lower classes, they would be spending it on things like, for example, food, gas, electricity, whereas the luxury goods that the middle class spend have a longer supply chain. Now, as I just pointed out to you before, this taxation is going to... Yes, of course, I will give up.
So at the moment, working class people have to spend 8 or 9 hours a day to get enough money to pay the rent and buy food. What they don't have, which we get into the proposition, is time to buy luxury goods. So actually, if that's what you're concerned about, you should support this policy.
Nowhere near done. The taxation this would require, the dominant form of taxation this would require, the ridiculous amount that it would require, would all be levied from the middle classes. No, thank you. Because the middle classes are the dominant taxpayers in every single country. The upper classes, all it requires to get out of tax is a little bit of clever planning. So, for example, if you've got 100 grand tucked away, shove it in a trust, you don't have to pay it. It's fine. When you die, 3% tax. So all of this will go on the middle classes. But when the middle classes buy things, they buy things with a longer supply chain, with a technical knowledge, and training being required and provided. So it's not just a supply chain, it's also schooling, which is another supply chain. It also, because the supply chain is so long, it invariably involves factories in the developed world, which under their regime completely goes out of the order. These factories in the developed world provide jobs for people in the developed world. Now, you can argue that $2 an hour is far too little to be paying them. Yes, no thank you. However, there are factories in the developed world. This would also require a service industry, mostly cities, where the poor people are. So when the middle classes have the money to buy the luxury goods, it's beneficial for everybody, not just for the middle classes. Whereas if you were to take all of that money from the poor middle classes, who are always being penalised for everything, if you earn 40 grand or more in this country, have fun sending your kid to education. However, if you take all this money away from them, They then can't spend it, which doesn't stimulate the economy, which doesn't build up the smaller jobs, which are better for the poorer individuals to get into. So you end up with a vicious cycle. You're getting the money out of here, no thank you. Then you have lower tax receipts because the economy is less buoyant and is now stagnating. And with lower tax receipts, you might even see, for example, a decrease of UBI. So what we actually heard about the Alaska regime, they were entirely wrong. They didn't do the reading. It was $1,200 a year from the oil revenues total that came through into Alaska. $12,000 a year. Sorry, no, $1,200 a year. Now, that also isn't $1,200 all the time. That also went up and down, year on year. So the highest they ever got was $3,500, but the lowest they ever got was $250. Now, if you have a stagnating economy where there aren't jobs being created and things are slowing down because you're taking so much money from the middle class, you start seeing that ebb and flow. No, thank you. Now, I also have another substantive point, which is democracy. We've actually seen in Finland, where this was trialled, not successfully, might I add, that what we've seen from it is an increase in trust in the government. Who the hell wants that? Who wants an increase in trust for the government? When you have trust in the government, what do? They increase your taxes. Go on, I'll give...
Yeah, so specifically you talk about trusting in the government, but specifically the UBI here says that we don't have to trust in the government because now it is your funds to spend however you want versus welfare. You have to trust the government to spend as much. So how do you respond to that?
It saw an increase directly because of the UBI payment. That's how I respond to that. So the money is coming down to them, yes. However, I don't want trust in the government, full stop. I want you all to be cynical, narcissistic, hideous people in the eyes of the government, because every penny they take from your pocket is theft. I'm bleeding heart libertarian. Anyway, I want you all to be cynical, because if you're not cynical and you don't look into every single piece of legislation passed by the government, they ask for increased taxes. Then they say that you have to send your kid into childcare. Then they say you can't do this, that and the other. Then they want to build a wall. Then they want to spend your money on utter crap that you didn't ask for. The United States government spends $850 billion a year on their armed forces, and it's all because you trusted them too much. And for that, we are very glad to oppose.
That was John Martin, student from Cardiff University, on closing opposition. And now we will turn it up to the final speech on the government bench. This will be Mary Catherine Purcell from the Louisiana State University, Shreveport.
So let's get the show on the road, everybody. First, I'd like to extend a bunch of thank yous to everyone here in Cardiff. We've enjoyed our time here. It was a little rainy, a little dark. It was like 1:20 a.m. when we arrived, but, you know, we've enjoyed it since then. And also a big thank you to everyone at home, including the Knoll Foundation, for making this happen. Okay, so as the whip, my job today is ultimately going to be, what have you been hearing and which side is better, the prop or the op at the end of the day, right? So I couldn't scale it down, guys. I'm going to have 4 major questions for you today. Okay, so the very first question is going to be, are there enough benefits to support the UBI? Now, we've heard a lot of scare tactics, a lot of numbers, and a lot of money coming from the opposition today. But what the speaker before me failed to mention, or failed to address, rather, is that my partner actually addressed in our counter model that what's going to happen is we're going to reallocate funds. Funds that are already there, the money exists. We're not taking anything out of anyone. He already talked about how we reallocate funds from the military, as well as getting rid of a couple of different government assistance programs that do not work in the status quo. We specifically mentioned welfare as well as SNAP. So let's get into how specifically that's going to help. So welfare, ultimately, as we asked in a couple of questions POIs, welfare doesn't address everyone's issues. People who need welfare don't get a guaranteed handout from welfare. There are still requirements that have to be met. There are a variety of reasons that you might not qualify for that government assistance. That is why it is a ceiling, as my partner gloriously brought into today's round. What we're going to do is get rid of that ceiling that holds people down, and we're going to create a floor. Not this time, sir. We're going to create a floor. That universal basic income is going to help them climb. So let's see, on SNAP, whenever my partner brought in that of hunger, yes ma'am, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, so you talk about helping people climb. However, those with like higher medical costs and higher like costs associated with their living, have their needs met, whereas other people have more.
Wait, I'm sorry. You said that people with medical needs have their needs met already?
Yes, but the other people have the ability to throw money at like college or getting better opportunities. So how are you actually solving for the problems of inequality?
Okay, so what I just heard from the opposition was people that have medical needs have the money that they need, and we're throwing money at people to go to college. I didn't really hear necessarily anything bad coming from that question. Rather, we talked about specifically helping people go to college, as my partner brought in. He said that people actually use the funds, for instance, whenever you talk about textbook costs and things like that. So I don't understand the issue with that question, but let's move on to SNAP. So SNAP is basically a government assistance program that helps with people who are hungry. But once again, you have to meet certain requirements in order to receive this government program. So what we see here from the opposition is they want to expand on SNAP and on welfare, not this time, they want to expand on these two government programs that the government, I apologize, has already shown you they don't work. So making them bigger is still not going to work. We need to revamp the system. It is essential that universal basic income be the fixer-upper here. So let's get into my second question of 4. Is there incentive to work? Yes, sir, I'll take the question.
Now, let's bring up, you say it doesn't work. Let's bring up the example that the government bench brought up and you guys already tried in the United States that doesn't work. So when we see that the UBI doesn't work in the United States, and the fact that you actually haven't answered my question, or that it's not solving the root issues, how do you expect anything to change when you're giving everyone painkillers and you haven't solved the cancer?
Absolutely. What they are asking for here is they're asking for you that you make a ceiling that goes from here to here even wider. So they're not going to fix any problems. They're going to make the problems worse on the opposition side. So let's get into that second question. Is there incentive to work? As you heard in my POI from the opening government, I said, so people are passionate about their work. The answer was yes. People are passionate, they have a right to it, they have a freedom to it, people love their work. So we see from the government side, with universal basic income, there is incentive to work. As my partner brought in, not only is there camaraderie, people find romance there, and also people have a passion about the things that they do. There is a sense of pride, which the opposition admitted to. Let's get into my next question. Is a universal basic income a better alternative to current programs? Well, I think we've already actually nailed that one in the board as far as it can go. In my fourth question is going to be for you to consider which model helps the most amount of people. So we've heard models, we've heard counter models, we've heard a lot today. What I want you to consider, no thank you sir, what I want you to consider in today's round is ultimately the ceiling and the floor. Okay, what's going to help the biggest amount of people? Expanding the ceiling from 1 block to 4 blocks wide? Or is it going to be break through that ceiling and create a floor that every single person can stand on because of universal basic income? Now, let's see, the opening opposition, yes sir.
See, again, you claim we're not going to help anyone, but you haven't yet answered the fact that you haven't yet answered the fact that the UBI systems have already been in place, haven't worked ever, and the fact that you are claiming it's going to work when no government has the ability to send. So you're just selling a pipe dream. So how is this pipe dream going to help anyone?
Sure, absolutely. I would actually like to quote, I believe it was John F. Kennedy. I might mess this up. But ultimately, he said that he had a vision, that there was going to be people on the moon within a decade. He said, we're not going to do this because it's easy. We're going to do this because it's hard, and it's going to address all of our energies and skills. What it means is no one's ever done it before. Sure, people may have tried and failed. No, thank you, ma'am. That's the end of my questions. People may have tried and failed, but ultimately, this is a vision that we believe and we support. And look at what the American people have done. We have put people on the moon. Okay, so let's move on to, let's see, I guess just some, let's look at the top half for a moment. Okay, in the top half, we see the Prime Minister, again, offered us a plan, and we agree, as the closing government, there is a right to life. We absolutely agree with that. The main difference between their plan and our plan is we're still going to allow for the minimum wage, and we're going to reallocate funds to allow UBI to take place. So what's going to happen is, as you heard from the opposition, they said that we spend too much money on armed forces. Okay, let's reallocate some of that money. This is a problem that we can actually work through and work with. So this House ultimately supports a universal basic income. With that, I yield the rest of my time. I feel confident in asking you to please vote for the government side because we have destroyed this debate. Thank you.
And that was Mary Catherine Purcell from Louisiana State University Shreveport closing the side government side of the debate. And now we will turn it over to Opposition Whip Matthew Dean from Cardiff University to end the opposition bench.
Okay. So we think there are two clashes in this debate. One, who benefits the poor the most, and two, we think there's one clash in this debate. One, who benefits the poor the most. But I just want to reiterate what my partner brought to you. He brought to you 2 points. How we get economic growth in our system, why it's not possible under their side, and 2, why we get less trust in the government. So, he told you that under any system in which we provide UBI, it would have to require higher taxes, that it would be levied through the middle class. And he's correct, and he has proved why this leads to a more stagnant economy, mainly through the different types of goods they buy compared to the working class. He's also brought to you about how democracy, trust in the government will be undermined under the system. And we think this is important for a number of reasons. Yes. We think this is important for a number of reasons. One, because when there is he said that there would be more trust in the government, and we think this is important for a few reasons. One, because we think that trust in the government is important for say, the political process and for elections. So what we say is that once UBI has been enacted, it then becomes harder to reform it, and we believe that there will be problems in reforming this because it will lead to a stagnant economy. So my partner has said that because there will be a stagnant economy, and because that there would be a problem in reforming it to say ease that stagnation, we say that under our side there was actual direct harm to everyone in our economy because of that stagnant economy. Two, because the government also said that there are current issues within the bureaucracy in determining who gets it. It's very hard to get it. We say that these things could just continue. We say that these things could just continue under UBI because we get, as a result of this, more trust in government. It's therefore harder for those people to then criticize and then to be critical of government spending. We say that even if it doesn't happen under UBI, it could happen in other places of the government where corruption and misallocation of funds could happen. And we think this is important. We think this is important because it now makes the government less efficient and therefore requires it to even tax. Therefore, it requires people to tax the government. Therefore, it requires the government to tax people. No, thank you. It therefore requires people to be taxed even more. We believe that compounds on what my partner also said in the idea that this takes away from the middle class who then spend on luxury goods to keep this economy rolling. So, with that said, I'd just like to say a bit of rebuttal. No, thank you. So, government has said that this is about replacing current welfare spending with this, and that therefore there is still the money to fund it. But we show you under our side that in the future we will have less money to fund it, and we will have less money to fund it, and therefore would become less reliable. My partner showed you this when he talked about the Alaskan Fund and how the money that is distributed changes every year and therefore is not very consistent. No, thank you. Yes, right. But there's also one more important thing that is missing from the debate, and that is the status quo. So the question is that government's impacts are only important so far as they are unique to introducing UBI. But we think that many of their impacts are not unique, because when they say people can go for more training, people are able to go for more training. They're able to be a bit more free to say purchase more goods. No, thank you. We say that under our current system, we already have We already have things which are able to help with this. We have, say, we have targeted benefits through training programs, through training programs, and as such. Except POI, anyone? Yeah.
So specifically, y'all talk about this tax that has to be raised on the middle class, but our question here, I think, with all of government's side is why are we ignoring the fact that we can reallocate funds from the military budget or scale the taxes so that the middle class doesn't have to take the burden as much as y'all are claiming? The government side is missing the answers to these questions. All four of us, I think, have asked.
Well, the thing is that, as OG said, in many Western liberal democracies, there's not a lot of funding. There's not a lot of a very small percentage is allocated to the military anyway, maybe 2% or 10%. Maybe in the US, where the budget is a lot, then they could reallocate that. But in many Western liberal democracies, they can't really allocate that, and so we think that it will require more taxation on the middle class. We say on side opposition, we believe that we bring you benefits to the poor because we actually give you a correct characterization of how we get economic growth and how we get economic growth and how we get jobs for poor people, which we believe is the most important thing in this debate. We also tell you why this increases trust in the government and why that is a bad thing because it makes it easier for corruption in the government and for wasteful spending to go unimpeded by public criticism. And with that, I beg you to oppose.
Thank all of our speakers for this lovely debate. The adjudicators are now going to go somewhere to render a verdict of some description.
And that was Matthew Dean closing side opposition as the whip. And we are now going to turn it over for a little commentary to discuss tonight's debate as the adjudicators head out to make their final call. So as we've discussed in our previous sort of commentaries about this, there's a panel of 4 adjudicators who now have to engage in a pretty detailed and lengthy discussion to decide who actually won tonight's debate. And our adjudication panel tonight is made up by Alex Amos, student from the University of Central Missouri, AJ Edwards, student from Louisiana State University, Shreveport, and then 2 students from here at Cardiff University, Margarita Donova and also Karsten Madsen. So they are leaving the chamber and they will begin their own discussion on who they think won tonight's debate. If you tuned in a little bit later, just a little recap of tonight's resolution. This House supports a universal basic income, and we will probably refer to the universal basic income as UBI. So when you hear us say UBI in our discussion, that's what we're referring to, is that universal basic income. So, Jack, what do you think about tonight's debate?
I think it went directions I didn't expect it to go. Mm-hmm. Usually it's more philosophical, and both sides attempted to get more specific with mm-hmm. models and talked about funding, those kinds of things. And so it went in a direction I didn't really expect it to go. I thought, it was a good debate.
Yeah, I would agree. I also was a little bit surprised, especially since we talked pretty specifically about that word supports and how that usually means a more philosophical-based debate. Yeah. It also shows that we fall back on our tendencies a little bit more, that we want something a little bit more specific to talk about, which makes total sense. But I do think they brought up some really interesting philosophical arguments as well, but also some points that I thought, oh, that's really interesting. So we're going to deconstruct these speeches just a little bit more. And based on my own understanding, I think there were really 2 sort of opposing sides that boil this down to a more understandable topic. And the first one for me is practicality versus morality. So out of side government, we heard that the government has a moral obligation to support its people, to provide perhaps this UBI, to give them an opportunity to perhaps pursue education or just get basic human needs secured.
Food, shelter, those kinds of things. Yeah.
So side government is really advancing this issue of morality and how the government has this obligation to support that. And then on side opposition, they brought up several points about practicality. And that is always really tricky to look at, morality versus practicality. So what do you think? How do you approach that in a debate? It's coming from side opposition. Like, how do you debate against morality?
Well, I think you see it in our own political debates that we've seen over the last few years. I mean, you have essentially the Democrats arguing a lot of things like universal health care or a UBI, universal basic income, changes and reforms to the tax code, these kinds of things that they really feel that government should supply for its people. And then you have, to a certain extent, conservatives and Republicans on the other side basically saying, well, that's well and good, but how do you pay for it?
Right.
Do you really want to raise taxes 30, 40, 50%? Do you want to take money away from the military to pay for basic health care? And so it mirrors, I think, very much the political debates that you're seeing in the United States right now. The idea of what should a government do, what's the right and responsibility, the duties of a government versus, okay, well, but how do we pay for it?
I think you're right. And honestly, I think that's one of the really fantastic advantages of this trip is, like you said, this debate mirrors the debates that are happening not in just our country, but across any sort of Western democracy.
I mean, you heard, the leader of the second opposition when he talked about Britain and he talked about France and he talked about, there are lots of countries that are trying to figure out how do you guarantee basic subsistence to your citizens without bankrupting the government and putting the government into a position where it can't provide for the common defense. It can't provide for basic services. It can't provide for police and all those kinds of things. And it's a tricky thing for Western democracies right now.
Now, I thought it was a very interesting point coming out of opening opposition where they addressed, sure, we might not be prioritizing the human need of life, right? But we're also instead prioritizing more of those needs like education, like healthcare. So, one of the main arguments coming out of the Prime Minister's speech was the right to life. And one of the main arguments coming out of the leader of the opposition speech was, sure, but we have so many other rights. So do you think a universal basic income would really hinder those other rights that the side opposition bench brought up?
Well, I mean, personally, unless you can find a way to pay for it, I think it would erode the government's ability to guarantee and deliver on other rights. And it just comes down to a question of how do you guarantee? I mean, we have a lot. 1 in 5 children in America go to bed hungry at night. We have homeless. We have a lot of problems in the United States. I don't necessarily think, one direction it didn't go that I was kind of hoping it would go, and I saw it written on your paper. The whole idea of, as citizens of the United States or Great Britain, we have a responsibility to take care of our fellow citizens. And so things like churches and charities and, helping those in our own community, with food banks and things like that. Maybe the government can't provide those things. Why don't we shift that to the private sector and incentivize the private sector to try to do more to help people? I think everybody wants to help people. The question is, what's the best way to get it to them? And to make sure that it works and that people don't take advantage of it. We heard lots of argumentation about, well, people exploit the system or people don't qualify for the system or, if you're a church or a charity and you open up a food bank, very often it's open to anybody that says, hey, I'm hungry. Kind of cuts out the middleman.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the really interesting arguments that I thought came out of the second speaker on side opposition, which is Madison Marquardt from the University of Central Missouri, was this whole idea of equality versus equity. And how those two are very fundamentally different, but they often get skewed and believed to be the same things. So what do you think about that? Could you explain this difference between equality and equity with us?
Well, the universal basic income is basically an equality kind of thing. It's not need-based. There's no means testing. It's the basic idea that every citizen over a certain age gets paid a certain amount by the government. Say it's $10,000 a year. Well, Bill Gates or myself, I don't need the $10,000 a year. However, I know a lot of people, a lot of students who go hungry, who don't have rent, who can't afford to stay in school because they can't pay for the books. They could use it. Okay, so there's this idea that giving everybody the same amount of money suddenly makes them equal. But it doesn't, because $10,000 in one person's pocket is a lot of money, and to somebody else, such as Bill Gates, he doesn't need it. And so there's a question of equity. How do we get needs to the people who really need it, and at the same time not give extra to people who don't need it? And so it's it's kind of like a marriage. People say it's always 50-50, and that's, equality. And that's, most marriages, anybody that's been married for any length of time will tell you it's more 110. You both have to give everything you can. And there'll be some days where it is equal. It's 50-50. I know my wife probably takes care of me a lot more than I take care of her. So she would probably say it's more like 90-10. And if I can get 10 out of Jack, it's a good day.
Shout out to Christine Rogers.
So it's always there in our government. How do we make sure that citizens get what they need, get what they deserve, without other people saying, wait, that's not fair. Where's mine? Well, you don't need yours.
Right.
Yeah.
What I thought was really interesting is the closing government, who is Dom Mercer and Mary Catherine Purcell, both debaters from Louisiana State University Shreveport, really did a great job of addressing that whole concept of equality versus equity when they brought up that metaphor of the floor versus the ceiling.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, if you provide a floor and allow people to rise from that floor, then there's a basic equality, right? But the issues of equity then can sort themselves out through education, through opportunity, through hard work, those kinds of things. And so there's probably a good balance there.
Yeah. It was a good debate, like you said. I was pretty impressed. It was an interesting one to listen to, as I'm sure our viewers back home thought as well. Some points that were brought up that I think were pretty assumed in the debate of this nature. Like, those were expected things. But like we said, there were also some topics that were a little bit surprising, which makes the debate really interesting. Like, I would have never thought to bring in artificial intelligence or robots in the workplace. But honestly, it was a very interesting point.
It is. I mean, people are concerned about the loss of jobs. And what are people going to do when, robots essentially take over their jobs? And I think we've seen in the United States that those people very often get retrained into other technical positions. Somebody's got to service the machines. Somebody's got to build the machines. So I don't know that artificial intelligence is, going to render all jobs moot and hobbies.
But it is an interesting point in tonight's debate.
Yeah,
it's how it would impact the workplace.
Right. Yeah. Because in the automotive industry and certain factory industries and those kinds of things, we have seen a loss of jobs. And those people have a real problem, meeting basic needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a little wrap up of the debate, and we will hear a little bit more of it when the adjudicators come back and give us their final call. But there's a few other things we want to talk about in tonight's commentary. One of them, first of all, is the chamber. Did you all see that chamber? It is so beautiful. So President Best, we would like to ask you specifically to look at that chamber. The UCM Talking Mules Speech and Debate Lounge could definitely use an upgrade. Don't worry, we've taken a lot of pictures. We'll be sure to share them with you.
If you could get, some sculptors, maybe, to do this stone, they have the Cardiff University, we were marveling at the buildings, and I was having the students and you guess how old the building was, and they were all saying, 16-something, 17-something. The main building in Cardiff University was built the same year as the University of Central Missouri.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're about even in terms of age. But their debate chamber is definitely better than ours.
We're just being silly, but it is beautiful. Holy
beautiful.
Toledo.
We could have faculty senate in there.
Ooh.
You could have the president's council in there.
Oh, my goodness.
Really nice.
The options are endless.
Leather chairs, I'm telling you.
Okay, so back on topic. We want to bring up a couple of the interesting little nuances that you probably saw in the video.
Yeah,
so you probably saw some
Yeah.
people popping up and standing up in the middle of people's speeches. Jack, do you want to tell us a little bit about what these POIs and these questions do for the debate? Like, how do we use that as a feature in the debate? How do we use it strategically in the debate? What are they trying to do when they stand up and do all this?
Well, there's basically two strategies. One is you really have a question. You're not sure exactly what somebody is trying to argue, or it's not clear. And so you stand up and ask a point of information where you really are trying to get some information. The second thing that they do with points of information is it's not really a question. It's a statement, and they're sort of trying to force the other person to address something in their speech. Well, what would you say if? And then they pose a hypothetical, and that causes the speaker to stop what they're talking about and address that hypothetical. So a lot of times in the British parliamentary style, they'll offer points of information. And part of it is I really do have a question, but part of it also is I'm trying to distract you from what you're talking about, your train of thought, interrupt it, and maybe, you'll say something silly or,
Get off topic.
Yeah, get off topic, or
forget where you are.
Forget where you are, or contradict yourself. I've seen that plenty of times.
Sure.
And then sometimes the only way that the top half can stay in the debate, because they basically have their 4 speeches and then they're quiet for 4 speeches. So the only way they can stay in it is to offer points of information. So very often the Prime Minister will give points of information to try to remind people what the Prime Minister said. What about when I said XYZ? How would you respond to that?
Right.
So it's a way of keeping themselves in the debate.
And I think you could see that Madison Marquardt, so our student from University of Central Missouri, and Ethan Arbuckle, the student from Louisiana State University, Shreveport, who were in opening opposition, they did an excellent job of keeping themselves in the debate.
Right.
So
Lots
constantly asking questions, constantly pointing their questions back to their case.
Well, and also, pointing out you haven't answered XYZ.
Right,
We brought this up a long time ago. We asked for an answer. You haven't answered it. So it also points out flaws in subsequent speakers.
Right, right. So could you explain a little bit of this? So when we see speakers doing this.
Yeah, it goes back to the British Parliament to a certain extent. And when a speaker stands up, a lot of times you've heard them say, "Not at this time," or "No thank you, sir," "No thank you, madam." And basically people are popping up trying to answer questions, and they'll say, "Not at this time." After a while, that gets exhausting. And so what you'll see is they start waving people down. And so they're basically, somebody will pop up and they'll go, not at this, oh, I'm off camera. Not at this time. So not at this time. It's just a way of saying, I don't want your point. Sit down. I'm still talking. I'll get you at the end of my point. So it's just a way of telling people to sit down.
FYI, I have tried both of these strategies on Dr. Rogers, and
Doesn't
neither
work.
one
No.
works.
No.
But I will continue.
No, doesn't work. Talk to the hand.
So a couple other things that I think are really important for us to bring up. What I love about this style of debate are the life skills that are transferred into the workplace, into relationships, into any mode of communication that these students are going to engage in professionally and personally. So what happens is they're given the resolution or the topic, and then they have about 15 to 20 minutes to prepare.
Yeah.
So the speeches that you heard tonight are very much extemporaneous.
Yeah.
They're speaking off the cuff.
Right.
And then when you add in that extra level of difficulty, when students are popping up, asking questions, getting them distracted, getting them off course, wow, talk about life skills that are going to benefit them.
And here's the thing, some of the, for people that follow politics, or they follow the economic arguments and those kinds of things, you listen to these college students and you say to yourself, that seems a little confused, or I don't think they're expressing themselves as well as they might, or I expected a little better argument here. That's the thing. You have to understand, they are college students. These college students are not majoring in economics, and they're speaking from just basic knowledge off the cuff. And so, if somebody asked me about fashion, I don't know. Christine just dresses me in the morning. She says, wear this and this, don't wear that. And that's about what I know. So you give me 20 minutes and I couldn't put together a cogent speech on, fashion. So it's something where if they get into a boardroom, out in business, or if they're teaching and a question that they're not expecting comes from a student, or they're an attorney and a witness says something that they don't expect. It's training for them to think on their feet very quickly, to continue talking, to not let it get them off track or flap them, and to talk as best they can and still make their point.
Absolutely.
And they're this crew that we brought over this year, some of them are quite young. They're quite new, and I think some of the Cardiff debaters are also quite new. And so it's a skill that they'll pick up. If you listen to the Trinity debate, if you listen to some of the other debates, we've heard maybe some more experienced speakers. They'll get there. That's the thing. So I was really pleased.
I was too.
It's a really tough topic. I mean,
it is a very tough topic.
If you talk to politicians in America, they can't string a sentence together on it either, and really have it make sense. So to come out with good arguments,
yes,
as they
did.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive to me.
I agree. And just their ability to adapt and respond on the fly. So as you notice, a lot of the speakers have to rebut the previous speech. So not only did they have to prepare their own speech and they're speaking off the cuff there, they are rebutting pretty much in the moment. So they have no time to prepare for that. So that's almost even more impromptu like speaking. And again, these skills are so transferable, and they're just going to benefit them so much in their professional and personal life.
I mean, you have some idea, what the opposition is going to say, because you kind of are well informed on both sides.
Sure.
So you have no idea how they're going to put it together, the evidence that they're going to use, or the analogy or the example. And so you really have to think very quickly, how do I take that argument apart? How do I deconstruct it? How do I then make a cogent argument that will build up our side? And it's the only way that they learn to do that is by being in these kinds of debates. It's education You can talk about logical fallacies. You can talk about how you speak. You can give them some public speaking experience in the classroom, but without having it outside the walls, it's really tough.
It's very much engaged learning.
Right. It looks like the adjudicators are getting ready to re-enter the chamber, and here they come. It will be really interesting to hear their call.
Yeah, so we will turn it back over to the live stream in the chamber, and we will be back with you in just a moment.
That was a fantastic debate all the way around to be had, so thank you everyone for participating in that. It was a very good adjudication process, and at the end of it we did come to a unanimous decision. In the first position is closing government, in the second position is opening government, in the third position was opening opposition, and in the fourth position was closing opposition. The adjudicators will make themselves available. If you all have any questions for us, please feel free to come talk to us about how we saw that debate happen. Congratulations, everybody.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was Alex Amos, student from the University of Central Missouri. He served as tonight's chair of the adjudication panel.
He's working on his master's.
He is. He's a master's student for us. He gave the final call for the adjudication panel, and the one, so the team that they felt did the best in the debate, was given to closing government, and that was Dom Mercer and Mary Kate Procell from the Louisiana State University, Shreveport. They gave the 2 to opening government. So that was the team from Cardiff University of Ed Mason and Megan Morello. Also, really quickly on that, so you probably noticed that Megan did not have a Welsh accent. She is a student from the United States. She grew up around Chicago. And that is another reason that we do this, showing our students that opportunities abroad are really fantastic, and they could extend their studies here as well. So that was the team in the second place. So the adjudication panel felt that the side government bench definitely won tonight's debate.
Yeah.
And then in third place was opening opposition, and that was Ethan Arbuckle from LSUS and Madison Marquardt from University of Central Missouri. And then the 4 was given to closing opposition, which was the other team from Cardiff University of John Martin and Matthew Dean. Really, really great debate tonight. It was fun to listen to. Very interesting.
And so the way the British parliamentary scoring would work, this would be a victory for the U.S., a 4-2. So the U.S. would get 4 points, Cardiff would get 2. But the scoring is not as important as the education.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
it's
the thing.
all about
it's a
the
study
experience.
abroad, and whether they get the 1 or the 4 or the 2 or the 3, they will be able to say that they came to the UK, that they had a great time, learned a ton of things, and I think this will help them at home. Win the debate.
They might not remember the topic 20 years from now, but they will absolutely remember this experience.
Absolutely.
So just a quick reminder, we are going to do a live wrap-up show from Wales tomorrow.
We're going to wrap.
Oh, no, we will not be rapping. No, you will not be rapping.
I thought we were rapping.
But we really want to get questions from our audience. So from everybody back home, please make comments on the YouTube page with questions. You could also email Jack, myself, Shannon Johnson, Trey Gibson from LSUS. You can post on either of the LSUS Facebook page or the University of Central Missouri Debate and Forensics Facebook page. Send us your questions and we will answer them. We will not wave them down. We will not say not at this time. We will engage. We will answer, and we want to just help you understand what we're doing over here even a little bit more.
And just a quick shout out to the DMP students.
Yes.
This coverage is totally possible by the DMP students who came along with us, set up all of this camera work, all this radio work. This is the most awesome coverage we have ever had for the Cup. So we really it's wonderful to see them in action.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
DMP faculty, you would be so proud.
Yeah.
This is phenomenal. They are learning so much. And, every snafu they've hit, they have conquered with grace.
Yep.
They have figured it out. They've adapted. They've made it work. And we are just so thrilled to have them with us. This is an awesome opportunity in action.
Yep.
So please tune in again tomorrow from the Cardiff Hotel, probably, for our wrap-up show.
The Royal Cardiff.
I tell you what, Wales is amazing, and I am in love with this country. So we can't wait to touch base with you tomorrow. Send us your questions again, and we will chat with you soon. Have a fantastic rest of your day. We are signing off from Cardiff University.
Take care.